We'll be spending summer at your beach house. Stephanie, the kids, and her parents too. You can stay in the back room and leave the master suite for us. My son Patrick's words weren't phrased as a request. They were a statement of fact, delivered with the casual entitlement he'd perfected since childhood. I gripped my phone tighter, staring out at the ocean view I'd spent Christopher's life insurance money to wake up to every morning. The back room? I repeated, though I'd heard him perfectly. The back room was barely large enough for a twin bed and dresser, originally meant for household help, with no bathroom attached and certainly no view of the turquoise waves that had helped heal my grief these past 6 months. It makes sense, Mom, Patrick continued, his voice carrying that familiar note of impatience. There's 5 of us plus Stephanie's parents. You're just one person. Besides, you're always up early. You won't spend much time in there anyway. I closed my eyes, picturing my carefully decorated master suite with its seafoam walls, the reading nook where I'd placed Christopher's favorite chair, and the antique dresser displaying our wedding photo alongside the shell collection we'd started on our honeymoon. When were you planning to arrive? I asked, bypassing his logic altogether. Friday. We'll stay through mid-August. Stephanie needs a break, and the kids are driving her crazy cooped up at home. He paused, then added as if it were an afterthought, her parents could use the vacation too. Her dad's blood pressure has been acting up. 3 months. 7 people. My peaceful retirement haven transformed into a crowded vacation rental, with me relegated to servants' quarters. I see, was all I managed. Great. Stephanie will text you a grocery list. Make sure you stock up on Drake's energy drinks, and Molly only eats the gluten-free chicken nuggets, the ones in the blue package, not the green. After ending the call, I sat on my porch swing, watching the waves crash against the shore while a different kind of wave, of indignation, frustration, and something that felt suspiciously like rebellion, swelled inside me. What would you do, Christopher? I whispered to the salty air. My late husband had always been the buffer between Patrick and me. Kind but firm, Christopher had mastered the art of lovingly holding our son accountable while I tended to cave to Patrick's demands to keep the peace. With Christopher's sudden stroke 18 months ago, that buffer disappeared, and Patrick's expectations had only grown more presumptuous. My phone rang again. Amelia, my daughter from my first marriage, whom Christopher had loved as his own. Hey Mom, just checking in. How's the beach house treating you? I found myself spilling everything to her. Patrick's announcement, the backroom banishment, the 3-month invasion, including Stephanie's parents, whom I barely knew. Tell me you're not seriously considering this, Amelia said when I'd finished. The pediatrician's no-nonsense tone was exactly what I needed. What choice do I have? He's my son. And the grandchildren. Mom, she interrupted firmly. That's Christopher's life insurance money that bought that house. Your house. The dream retirement place you both planned for decades. Patrick has no right to commandeer it and stuff you in a closet for the summer. The thing is, I sighed, I already told him okay. I said I'd have everything ready. A pause. Then Amelia chuckled. Well, if you're going to have everything ready, why not really have everything ready? What do you mean? I mean, if they insist on coming without a proper invitation and rearranging your life without your consent, perhaps they should experience the full, authentic Meredith Collins hospitality package. I found myself smiling for the first time since Patrick's call. I'm listening. By the time we finished our conversation an hour later, a plan was forming, one that would have made Christopher roar with laughter. My husband had always said I missed my calling as a theater director, given my attention to detail and flair for the dramatic. Before I finish telling my story, please subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments what time you are listening to me. The next morning, I walked 2 houses down to visit my neighbor Jorge, a retired music professor who had become a dear friend since I'd moved in. Jorge, I said, as we pruned his hibiscus bushes together, I need your professional opinion. How loud would you say your saxophone playing can get, particularly early in the morning? His eyes twinkled with mischief. Depends on the reed I use, and whether I'm practicing scales or actually attempting music. And those speakers you use for your music appreciation classes? Professional grade. They can make the windows rattle if I position them correctly. By Wednesday, my preparations were in full swing. I visited every thrift store within 20 miles, made calls to Amelia's college roommate, who now ran a theatrical supply company, and had several earnest conversations with local wildlife control specialists about humane practices. I even signed up for an express delivery membership to ensure certain items would arrive in time. On Thursday, I moved my personal belongings out of the master suite, carefully removing all evidence of the comfortable oasis I'd created. In its place, I arranged an environment that Stephanie, with her minimalist design sensibilities and obsession with household cleanliness, would find particularly challenging. I worked through the night, setting up, adjusting, testing. By Friday morning, everything was in place. I had just enough time to shower and change before settling myself on the front porch swing with a glass of lemonade, the very picture of grandmotherly welcome. At precisely 2:17 p.m., Patrick's rented SUV pulled into the driveway. I watched as they emerged one by one, Patrick checking his phone even as he opened the trunk, Stephanie adjusting her designer sunglasses while surveying my modest home with barely concealed disappointment, Drake, 13, hunched over his handheld game console, Molly, 10, already whining about the heat, and finally Stephanie's parents, Harold and Evelyn, looking like they'd just stepped out of a country club brochure, complete with matching Lacoste polo shirts. "Mom!" Patrick called out with manufactured enthusiasm. "We made good time. Traffic wasn't nearly as bad as we expected." I rose to greet them, my smile serene as a Buddha's. "Welcome, everyone. I've been looking forward to your visit." That wasn't entirely a lie. I had indeed been looking forward to it, just not for the reasons they might assume. "The house looks quaint," Stephanie commented, which in her vocabulary meant disappointing. "It's perfect for our needs," I replied warmly. "Let me show you inside. I've prepared everything exactly as requested." As I led them through the front door, I caught Jorge peeking through his curtains 2 houses down. He gave me a thumbs up before disappearing from view. "I've put fresh towels in all the bathrooms," I narrated as they followed me inside, "prepared all the bedrooms, and stocked the kitchen with everyone's favorites." Patrick nodded absently, already heading toward the master suite with their luggage. "Great, Mom. We're pretty tired from the drive. I think we'll just get settled and maybe take a nap before dinner." "Of course, dear," I said, my tone honeyed. "Rest well. I have a feeling this is going to be a summer you'll never forget." As they disappeared down the hallway, I settled into Christopher's old armchair, now positioned perfectly in the living room, to view both the ocean through the front windows and the hallway leading to the bedrooms. 3, 2, 1. "Mom!" Patrick's voice bellowed from the master suite. "What is going on in here?" I smiled and sipped my lemonade. Operation Empty Nest Defense had officially begun. I took another leisurely sip of my lemonade as Patrick stormed back into the living room, his face flushed with indignation. "Mom, there's a life-sized cardboard cutout of Dad in the master bedroom. It's standing right next to the bed, staring at it." "Oh yes," I replied calmly. "I thought it would be comforting for you to have your father watching over you during your stay. Christopher always loved that room." Stephanie appeared behind Patrick, looking considerably paler than when she'd entered the house. "There are pictures of Christopher everywhere," she hissed. "On the walls, on the nightstands, even taped to the ceiling above the bed, dozens of them, all staring. 47 to be exact," I corrected her. "One for each year of our marriage. I find it so comforting to feel his presence, especially at night. Sometimes I swear I can feel him watching me sleep." Harold and Evelyn exchanged glances as they cautiously peered into the master bedroom from the hallway. "The bed sheets," Evelyn began hesitantly. "They have Christopher's face printed on them? Custom made," I beamed with pride. "Aren't they wonderful? I spared no expense. The pillowcases feature close-ups of his eyes. They're surprisingly lifelike in the dark." Drake, momentarily distracted from his gaming device, poked his head into the room and immediately recoiled. "That's super creepy, Grandma." "Creepy?" I placed a hand over my heart in feigned shock. "Oh no, dear. It's a tribute. I call it Christopher's Eternal Gaze. The room theme is never forgotten, never alone." Patrick ran his hand through his hair, a gesture so like his father's that it momentarily tugged at my heart. "Mom, we can't sleep in there. It's unsettling." "Unsettling? Nonsense!" I waved dismissively. "You get used to the feeling of being watched. I find it quite soothing now. But if you prefer, you could always take the back room I've been using. It's small, but there's only one photo of your father in there." "We are not staying in that closet you call a bedroom," Stephanie interjected firmly. "Patrick, we'll just Remove some of these pictures temporarily. My expression remained pleasant, but my voice took on a subtle edge. I wouldn't recommend touching Christopher's memorial displays. They're very precisely arranged according to the grief therapist's instructions. Disturbing them could trigger my anxiety disorder. What anxiety disorder? Patrick asked, bewildered. The one that developed after your father's death? I improvised smoothly. Didn't I mention it during our weekly phone calls? Oh wait, you haven't called in 3 months. Must have slipped my mind. Before Patrick could respond, Molly's piercing shriek echoed from the second bedroom. Mom! There's something moving under the bed! We all rushed to the children's designated room where Molly stood on a chair, pointing frantically at the floor. Oh, that's just Mr. Whiskers, I explained cheerfully. You got a cat? Patrick asked. Not exactly. I knelt down and made a soft clicking sound. Slowly, an enormous hermit crab the size of a small dinner plate emerged from beneath the bed, its antennae waving curiously. That is not a normal hermit crab, Stephanie gasped, backing away and pulling Molly with her. He's a coconut crab, I explained. Perfectly legal as pets in this state with the proper exotic animal permit. They're quite intelligent, almost like having a dog, except they can climb walls and open doors. They're mostly nocturnal, so he'll be more active when you're sleeping. Awesome, Drake exclaimed, momentarily interested in something beyond his screen. They're completely harmless, I continued, unless they feel threatened. Their pincers are strong enough to crack coconuts, hence the name. Best not to make sudden movements around him. Harold, who had been exploring the attached bathroom, emerged with a troubled expression. Meredith, there seems to be an issue with the toilet in here. Oh yes, the plumbing in this room is a bit temperamental. You need to flush twice, then count to 17 before using the sink. Otherwise, the pipes make this ungodly shrieking noise. Also, don't be alarmed if the water runs brown occasionally. The inspection report says it's not dangerous, just unappealing. Stephanie's mouth formed a tight line. And the master bathroom? Does it have temperamental plumbing too? Oh no, I assured her. That bathroom works perfectly. Though I should mention the shower has a slight electrical issue. Nothing dangerous, you just feel a small tingle when you touch the faucets. The electrician says it's within acceptable parameters. Patrick pulled me aside into the hallway, lowering his voice. Mom, what's going on? None of these problems were here when we visited at Christmas. I blinked innocently. Well, beach properties require constant maintenance, dear. Things deteriorate quickly with the salt air. I was going to address everything this summer, but then you announced your extended visit, so I postponed the repairs. I didn't want to inconvenience you with workers coming in and out. What about the third bedroom? For Stephanie's parents? Patrick asked, clearly hoping for better news. Ah, follow me. I led the increasingly subdued group to the third bedroom, which appeared normal at first glance. A pleasant room with twin beds and coastal decor. This looks fine, Evelyn said cautiously, as if expecting a trap. It's the quietest room in the house, I confirmed. Except between 3 a.m. and 6 a.m. when the foghorn sounds. What foghorn? Harold asked. We're not near a lighthouse. Oh, it's not a real foghorn. It's Jorge next door. He's a retired music professor who suffers from insomnia. He practices saxophone during those hours. He's quite talented, though still working on his embouchure. The walls here are remarkably thin. As if on cue, a discordant saxophone note blared from Jorge's direction, making everyone jump. He was just warming up, I explained. Wait until he really gets going. Patrick's facade of control was visibly crumbling. Mom, is there anything else we should know about the house? Let's see. I tapped my chin thoughtfully. The kitchen is fully functional, though the refrigerator door needs to be propped shut with a chair at night. The Wi-Fi works intermittently, better during full moons, strangely enough. Oh, and I should mention the local wildlife. Wildlife? Stephanie repeated weakly. Nothing to worry about. The raccoon family in the attic is quite respectful of boundaries. The seagulls only dive bomb people wearing red, so I wouldn't recommend that color, Stephanie. I noticed your swimsuit is crimson. I clapped my hands together cheerfully. Now, who's hungry? I've prepared a special welcome dinner. It's Christopher's favorite recipe, jellyfish casserole with seaweed garnish. The collective look of horror on their faces was almost enough to make me break character. But years of keeping a straight face through Patrick's childhood tantrums had prepared me well. Of course, if that doesn't appeal to you, there's a lovely seafood restaurant in town. Quite expensive, but I'm sure Patrick wouldn't mind treating everyone after your long journey. That sounds like a much better idea, Patrick said quickly. We'll go out for dinner and regroup. As they hurriedly retreated to discuss their options in hushed, urgent tones near the front door, I allowed myself a small, private smile. Christopher would have been proudly laughing by now, his shoulders shaking with silent mirth as he tried not to give away our prank. I could almost feel him beside me, whispering, "That's my Meredith. You've still got it, sweetheart." The summer had just begun, and I had so many more welcoming surprises in store for my entitled son and his family. By the time Patrick's SUV pulled out of the driveway for their dinner escape, I was already mentally reviewing the second phase of Operation Empty Nest Defense, scheduled to begin at approximately 11 p.m. tonight, right around the time they would be settling in for sleep. Dinner alone in my peaceful house was a delight. I savored a perfectly grilled piece of salmon on my porch swing, watching the sunset paint the ocean in shades of pink and gold. My phone had buzzed twice, first with a text from Amelia, "Operation underway? Keep me posted." Then with a message from Jorge, "Saxophone warmed up and ready for the midnight concerto. Should I start with scales or go straight to free jazz?" I replied to both, then checked the time. According to my calculations, Patrick and his entourage would return from dinner soon, exhausted from travel and hoping for a good night's sleep before tackling the issues with the house tomorrow. They would be disappointed. At 9:45 p.m., headlights swept across my living room as their rental SUV pulled into the driveway. I quickly settled into Christopher's armchair with a photo album on my lap, adopting the wistful expression of a grieving widow lost in memories. Patrick entered first, his expression caught between irritation and concern. "Mom, we need to talk about—" "Oh, you're back," I interrupted, dabbing at my eyes with a tissue. "I was just looking at these old photos of your father. Did you know he kept every single Father's Day card you ever made him? Even that one from 3rd grade with the macaroni that fell off. He said it was still the thought that counted." Patrick's annoyance visibly deflated, replaced by the awkward discomfort he always displayed when confronted with genuine emotion. "That's nice, Mom. But we really need to discuss the house situation." The rest of the family filed in, looking significantly less enthused than when they'd arrived. Drake was still glued to his gaming device, though the battery indicator was flashing red. Molly trailed behind her mother, whining about being tired. Stephanie's parents maintained their country club composure, but the strain was evident around their eyes. "What did you think of Barnacle Bill's?" I asked brightly, referring to the only seafood restaurant in town known for its excessive prices and mediocre food. "Did you try the shrimp platter? It's their specialty, though I've heard occasional complaints about food poisoning." "Nothing serious. It was fine," Patrick replied tersely. "Mom, about the sleeping arrangements." "Oh, that reminds me," I interjected, checking my watch. "It's almost time for the night sprinklers. I should have mentioned them earlier." "Night sprinklers?" Stephanie echoed. "Yes, for the special nocturnal plants in the garden. They need to be watered only when the moon is out. Something about lunar nutrients. The system runs every 2 hours from 10 p.m. until dawn. The control panel is quite temperamental, so I've learned to live with it." "Can't you turn them off?" Stephanie asked. "I wouldn't recommend it. Last time I tried, it triggered a complete shutdown of the house's electrical system. Took 3 days to reset everything." I shook my head gravely. The joys of modern smart homes. As if on cue, a mechanical whirring started outside, followed by the distinctive sound of water hitting windows. "That's odd," I frowned. "They seem to be aimed at the house tonight rather than the garden. Must be the sea breeze changing their direction." Stephanie moved to the window, her expression darkening as she watched water splashing against the glass. "Those sprinklers are deliberately pointing at the house. Are they?" I peered over her shoulder with manufactured surprise. "How strange." The landscaper did mention something about the system developing a mind of its own. "Apparently it's quite common with this model." Harold cleared his throat. "Perhaps we should all turn in. It's been a long day." "Wonderful idea," I agreed. "Oh, before I forget," I produced a stack of papers from beside my chair. "Here's the house information packet. Emergency numbers, local attractions, and most importantly, the House Quirks cheat sheet." Patrick accepted the papers warily. "House Quirks cheat sheet? Just a few peculiarities you'll want to be aware of," I explained. "For instance, don't use the microwave and toaster simultaneously unless you want to reset the circuit breaker in the crawl space under the house. The ceiling fan in the master bedroom occasionally drops small screws, so I recommend wearing protective headgear at night. And whatever you do, don't flush any toilets during a phone call. It creates some sort of telecommunications interference that results in extremely personal conversations being broadcast through the local marina's PA system. They stared at me in collective disbelief. Also, I continued cheerfully, the local raccoon family I mentioned tends to access the attic around midnight. They're quite considerate, though occasionally they drop nuts through the ceiling vents. Nothing to worry about unless you're directly beneath a vent, in which case, a helmet is advisable. Helmets? For falling nuts? Evelyn's perfectly manicured hand clutched her pearl necklace. Well, hazelnuts can be surprisingly heavy when dropped from attic height, I explained earnestly. Christopher once got a rather nasty bruise. I keep safety helmets in each bedroom closet, just in case. Molly, who had been half asleep against her mother, suddenly perked up. I don't want to get hit by nuts. Daddy, I'm scared. There's nothing to be afraid of, sweetie, Patrick assured her, shooting me a reproachful look. Grandma is just exaggerating. Of course, dear. I smiled benignly. I'm sure everything will be fine. The raccoons haven't dropped anything larger than a walnut in weeks. Drake finally looked up from his device. My battery's dead. Where can I charge it? There's an outlet in your room, I replied. Though I should mention the electrical currents in this house are a bit unpredictable. Christopher theorized that we're directly above some sort of electromagnetic anomaly. Electronics occasionally reset themselves, alarm clocks rarely work, and data sometimes disappears from devices without warning. Drake's eyes widened in horror. Data disappears? Like saved game progress? Among other things. But I'm sure it won't happen to your device. I patted his shoulder reassuringly. Probably. Stephanie, who had been scanning the house information packet with increasing alarm, looked up sharply. Meredith, this says the water heater only supplies 20 minutes of hot water, followed by a 4-hour recovery period. Yes, an unfortunate limitation of beach properties in this area. I nodded solemnly. That's why I've developed a family shower schedule. I pointed to a chart on the refrigerator. As you can see, the first hot water opportunity begins at 5:30 a.m., with 3-minute slots assigned to each person. 3 minutes? Stephanie looked aghast. That's not enough time to condition my hair. You get used to it, I assured her. I find that singing happy birthday twice while shampooing helps keep track of time. Of course, if you miss your slot, you'll have to wait until 10:30 a.m. for the next hot water cycle. Patrick's forced smile had transformed into an outright grimace. Mom, when were you planning to address these issues with the house? Oh, eventually, I waved dismissively. Probably in the fall, when service providers offer their off-season rates. Unless, of course, you'd like to handle it. Christopher always said you had his knack for home improvement. Before Patrick could respond, a tremendous, discordant blast of saxophone music erupted from Jorge's house, so loud it seemed to vibrate the windows. Drake dropped his gaming device in shock, and Molly clapped her hands over her ears. That's just Jorge saying goodnight, I explained over the cacophony. He usually plays for about 20 minutes before his first sleep cycle, then again around 3 a.m. He's been working on his interpretation of Coltrane, though I personally think it sounds more like a walrus giving birth. As the saxophone wailed through what might generously be called improvisation, I stood and stretched. Well, I think I'll turn in. My room may be small, but it's the furthest from Jorge's house, so I can barely hear him with my white noise machine running. Sleep well, everyone. I made my way toward the back room, then turned as if remembering something. Oh, I almost forgot to mention the ghost. 6 pairs of eyes stared at me. Ghost? Patrick repeated weakly. Well, ghost might be an exaggeration. Unexplained nocturnal phenomenon is probably more accurate. Previous owners mentioned something about a tragic drowning in the 1950s. Nothing to worry about. The whispering usually stops before dawn. With that parting gift, I retreated to my modest back room, closed the door, and buried my face in a pillow to muffle my laughter. Through the thin walls, I could hear the urgent, hushed conversation breaking out among my unwanted house guests. This is insane, Stephanie's voice carried clearly. Your mother has lost her mind. She's just adjusting to life without Dad, Patrick defended weakly. Well, I'm not staying in a room with dropping screws, raccoons, and ghosts, Molly wailed. Outside, the sprinklers continued their rhythmic assault on the windows, accompanied by Jorge's enthusiastic saxophone solo. Meanwhile, in my cozy back room, equipped with excellent soundproofing I'd installed weeks ago, I sent a quick update text to Amelia. Phase 1 complete. Targets unsettled. Commencing Operation Midnight Symphony. Christopher would be so proud. I rose at 5 a.m., as I had every day since Christopher's passing. There's something cleansing about the dawn at the beach. The soft light, the gentle lapping of waves, the promise of possibilities. This morning, however, carried extra sweetness as I quietly prepared for the next phase of Operation Empty Nest Defense. First, I disabled the hot water timer I'd installed yesterday. There was, in fact, plenty of hot water for everyone, knowing my sleep-deprived guests would soon be desperate for showers. Then I moved to the kitchen to begin preparing what would appear to be a conciliatory breakfast, my way of making amends for the difficult night they'd undoubtedly experienced. According to the series of gleeful texts Jorge had sent me throughout the night, he had performed 3 separate concerts at 11 p.m., 1:30 a.m., and 4 a.m., each featuring increasingly experimental saxophone techniques. Between these musical interludes, my pre-programmed sprinkler system had activated hourly, accompanied by the recorded sounds of scratching and thumping I'd installed in the attic. For the master suite, I'd arranged special effects that would activate between 2 and 3 a.m., subtle but disturbing. The digital picture frame on the nightstand would briefly flash a close-up image of Christopher's eyes, while a small speaker hidden behind the headboard would whisper, "I'm watching you," at random intervals. The ceiling fan was rigged to start at its lowest setting without warning, making the cardboard cutout of Christopher seem to move in the dim light. As I whisked eggs for a frittata, I heard the distinct sound of the master bathroom shower starting, followed almost immediately by a yelp and a string of curses from Patrick. Right on schedule, the shower temperature regulator I'd installed was working perfectly, alternating between freezing and scalding at random intervals. By 7:30 a.m., the smell of coffee, bacon, and freshly baked scones had filled the kitchen. I hummed cheerfully as I arranged everything on the dining table, the picture of grandmotherly hospitality. Patrick emerged first, dark circles under his eyes and his hair still damp from his shower adventure. "Good morning, dear," I chirped. "Did you sleep well?" The look he gave me could have curdled milk. "Mom, we need to talk about what happened last night." "Oh?" I blinked innocently. "Was Jorge's music too loud? I did warn you. He's quite passionate about his saxophone." "It wasn't just the music," Patrick began, his voice tight with restrained frustration. "The sprinklers kept hitting our windows all night. Something was definitely moving in the attic. The shower temperature fluctuated so wildly that I nearly got scalded. And Stephanie swears the eyes in Dad's pictures were watching her." "Watching her?" I pressed a hand to my chest in exaggerated concern. "Oh my. That's exactly what the previous owners described before they moved out. They called it Christopher's phenomenon, even though this was years before I bought the place. Isn't that a remarkable coincidence?" Patrick's eye twitched slightly. "Mom, there's no such thing as... There's something in my bathroom." Molly's piercing scream interrupted whatever Patrick had been about to say. We rushed to the children's bathroom, where Molly stood on the toilet seat, pointing frantically at the bathtub. "Ah," I said calmly when I saw the cause of her distress. "That's just Gertrude." "Gertrude?" Patrick echoed weakly. "My pet sand crab. She must have escaped her terrarium again. She likes to hide in the drain. I think she finds the moisture soothing." The substantial crab, nearly the size of a dinner plate, clicked its pincers menacingly from the bathtub drain. "You keep a giant crab as a pet?" Patrick's voice had risen an octave. "She's not giant, she's just prosperous," I corrected him. "The vet says she's the largest specimen he's ever seen. Her species is typically quite small, but Gertrude has thrived on a special diet I developed." "What do you feed it?" Drake asked, now interested despite himself. "Oh, a little of this, a little of that," I replied vaguely. "She's particularly fond of painted toenails, though. Something about the chemicals in the polish. That's why I always wear socks around the house." Molly, still perched precariously on the toilet, let out another wail. "I'm not taking a shower with that thing in there." "She's completely harmless," I assured her, "unless you make sudden movements, or wear anything sparkly. She's inexplicably attracted to glitter." I noted with satisfaction that both Molly's pajamas and her favorite scrunchie featured extensive glitter embellishments. By this time, Stephanie and her parents had joined the growing bathroom audience, all staring in horror at Gertrude, who had now emerged fully from the drain and was exploring the bathtub with methodical determination. "This is unacceptable," Stephanie declared, pulling Molly protectively behind her. "Patrick, we need to discuss alternative arrangements immediately." "Oh, but I've made breakfast," I protested, gesturing toward the kitchen. "Come, let's eat while it's hot. I can relocate Gertrude later." Reluctantly, they followed me back to the dining area, where the spread did look genuinely appetizing. Hunger won out over apprehension, and soon everyone was cautiously serving themselves. "These scones are actually quite good," Harold commented, seemingly surprised. "Christopher's recipe," I explained, pouring coffee for everyone. He was an excellent baker. These particular scones were his specialty, sea salt and kelp, with a touch of local sand for texture. Harold's chewing slowed dramatically. "Sand? Just a pinch," I assured him, "for authentic beach flavor. It's perfectly digestible. Most people consume several pounds of sand in their lifetime without realizing it." Stephanie discreetly spit her bite into a napkin, while Evelyn simply set her scone down, appetite visibly diminished. "Mom, there's no sand in these scones," Patrick sighed, having taken a large bite himself. "Isn't there?" I asked innocently. I could have sworn I added it. Perhaps it was the cricket flour instead. "Cricket flour?" Stephanie repeated, her face paling. "For protein," I nodded enthusiastically. "It's extremely nutritious, and you can barely taste the insects once they're ground up. I've been experimenting with sustainable cooking since your father passed. Did you know mealworms have more protein per ounce than beef?" Drake, who had been enthusiastically devouring the frittata, suddenly froze mid-chew. "The frittata doesn't have insects," I assured him. "That's made with regular eggs, and the suspicious-looking black specks are just truffle, not ants." "I wasn't worried about ants," Drake muttered. "Good, because those aren't in the frittata. They're candied as a topping for the yogurt parfaits. Very gourmet." No one reached for the parfaits. "Mom," Patrick said carefully, setting down his coffee cup, "I think we need to address some things about the house. There are clearly issues that need fixing before it's suitable for guests." "Oh?" I dabbed at my lips with a napkin. "Like what?" "Like the unreliable plumbing, the electrical problems, the wildlife," he listed, glancing toward the bathroom where Gertrude remained at large. "Not to mention the sprinkler system that seems programmed to target the windows specifically." "Yes, the house does have its quirks," I agreed. "That's why I was so surprised when you announced you'd be staying for 3 months without asking if it was convenient. I'd planned to have these issues addressed this summer, but with 7 people living here, repairs would be terribly disruptive." Patrick and Stephanie exchanged loaded glances. "Perhaps," Stephanie suggested with forced pleasantness, "we should consider alternative accommodations for the comfort of everyone." "Alternative accommodations?" I repeated, allowing just a hint of hurt to color my tone. "But I've prepared everything for your stay. I even gave up my bedroom, though I admit the back room has grown on me. It's quite cozy, and being near the laundry room means I'm the furthest from Jorge's saxophone solos." "There's a lovely resort about 20 minutes up the coast," Evelyn interjected, clearly seeing an escape route. "Perhaps we could look into their availability." "The Seabreeze Resort?" I brightened. "What a wonderful idea! They have excellent amenities. Though I should warn you, it's quite expensive during the summer season. But I'm sure that's not a concern for you all." Patrick shifted uncomfortably. I knew perfectly well that 3 months at the Seabreeze would cost a small fortune, especially with 7 people. "We'll look into options," he said non-committally. "Of course, dear. Whatever you think is best." I rose to clear the barely touched breakfast dishes. "Oh, I almost forgot. The exterminator is coming this afternoon to address the fire ant situation in the guest bedrooms. He said we should all avoid sleeping there for at least 2 days after treatment. The neurotoxins in the spray can cause interesting hallucinations in humans." "Fire ants?" Molly squeaked. "Just a small colony that's established itself in the wall cavities," I explained casually. "Nothing to worry about unless they breach the drywall, which only happens when they sense fear or detect vibrations from snoring. Do any of you snore?" As my shell-shocked guests exchanged alarmed glances, my phone chimed with a text message. I glanced at it and frowned dramatically. "Oh dear, that's the Marine Wildlife Rehabilitation Center. It seems today is my volunteer shift, and they have 3 new injured seagulls that need care. I completely forgot." "You volunteer with seagulls?" Stephanie asked skeptically. "Oh yes, it's quite rewarding. though they do tend to imprint on their caregivers, which is why a flock of them follows me home sometimes. They usually just roost on the roof, but occasionally they find their way in through the chimney. I checked my watch. I should be back by dinner. Feel free to explore the town while I'm gone. As I gathered my purse and headed for the door, I couldn't resist one parting gift. If the toilet in the hall bathroom starts bubbling, just put a heavy book on the lid. And whatever you do, don't answer the door if someone asks about the archaeological dig permit. I'll handle that when I return. I left them sitting in stunned silence at the breakfast table, Gertrude's occasional clicking from the bathroom providing perfect punctuation to their bewilderment. Once in my car, I texted Jorge, "Breakfast phase complete. Commence Operation Seagull Squadron in 1 hour." The response came immediately. "Roger that. Breadcrumbs and recorded seagull sounds ready for deployment." This was turning out to be the most entertaining summer I'd had in years. I spent the morning at the small cafe in town, enjoying a proper breakfast, sans fictional cricket flower, and catching up with my actual friends. The owner, Maggie, had known Christopher and me for years and was a willing accomplice in my defensive campaign. "So they just invited themselves for the entire summer and relegated you to the back room?" she asked, refilling my coffee cup. "That boy of yours always did have a sense of entitlement." "Christopher spoiled him," I admitted, "and I enabled it by never standing my ground, but not anymore." "So what's your next move?" Maggie leaned in conspiratorially. "I'm letting them stew for a few hours," I explained. "Jorge has arranged for a bread delivery truck to accidentally dump several bags of crumbs on my roof around noon, followed by his impressive collection of recorded seagull sounds played at maximum volume." Maggie's laughter drew curious glances from other customers. Meredith Collins, "Who knew you had such a devious streak?" Christopher would be howling with laughter. He always appreciated a good practical joke, I agreed, feeling a familiar pang of loss softened by fond memory. "Remember when he convinced the entire town council that the beach was being invaded by mutant horseshoe crabs? With those fake shells he carved. I'd forgotten about that." Maggie wiped tears of mirth from her eyes. "Well, your secret's safe with us. The whole town's on your side in this one." Around 2 p.m., I decided it was time to check on my house guests. As I pulled into my driveway, I was greeted by the magnificent sight of at least 30 seagulls circling my roof, diving occasionally toward the scattered breadcrumbs, while Jorge's professional-grade speakers emitted convincing seagull attack cries. The rental SUV was gone, suggesting Patrick and his entourage had fled the scene. Perfect. This would give me time for the next phase of preparations. Inside, the house showed signs of hasty departure. Half-empty coffee cups, a child's sweater draped over a chair, Stephanie's designer sunglasses forgotten on the counter. I sent a quick text to Jorge, thanking him for his excellent seagull soundtrack, then got to work. The master bedroom needed refreshing after last night's haunting. I replaced the Christopher cutout with a new version, this one with articulated arms that could be positioned in different poses. I added several more framed photos, strategically placing them so they seemed to watch the bed from every angle. The pièce de résistance was a small motion-activated speaker hidden in the air vent that would play Christopher's signature whistle whenever someone walked past. In the children's room, I released 6 harmless but impressively large hermit crabs I'd borrowed from my friend at the Marine Center. Each wore a tiny, glittery bow on its shell, making them particularly attractive to a 10-year-old girl with a fondness for sparkly things. I programmed their terrarium to open automatically around midnight. For Stephanie's parents' room, I took a subtler approach. I simply adjusted their bed to have a barely perceptible tilt, just enough to make them feel slightly off balance all night without being able to identify why. I also replaced their regular pillows with ones that would slowly deflate throughout the night. The common areas received special attention too. I scattered several realistic-looking rubber insects in strategic locations, under the coffee maker, in the dish cabinet, nestled among the towels. I replaced the regular light bulbs with ones that would gradually dim and brighten at random intervals. And I prepared a special welcome-back surprise involving the air conditioning system and a bottle of my most pungent essential oil, Eau de Low Tide. By 4 p.m., I was ready for their return. I settled into Christopher's chair with knitting needles and an unidentifiable project that was essentially a tangle of yarn, adopting the appearance of a harmless elderly woman pursuing a quaint hobby. The sound of tires on gravel announced their return. I heard car doors slamming, followed by Patrick's voice issuing instructions in a tone that suggested he was attempting to rally troops for battle. The front door opened, and my son entered first, his expression determined. "Mom, we need to talk," he announced, the rest of his family filing in behind him, looking sunburned and frazzled. "Oh, you're back," I exclaimed with manufactured delight. "How was your outing? Did you visit the lighthouse? The tour guide there is excellent, though he does tend to focus rather heavily on the tragedy of 1879. All those poor souls lost at sea. Some say you can still hear their cries during the full moon." "We didn't go to the lighthouse," Patrick said firmly. "We've been discussing the situation and we've come to a decision." "A decision? How exciting!" I continued knitting my incomprehensible yarn creation. "I've made a decision too. Fish stew for dinner. Christopher's special recipe. He used to say the secret ingredient was patience, but between us, it's actually fermented shrimp paste. Creates quite an authentic aroma." Stephanie stepped forward, her carefully maintained composure visibly strained. "Meredith, while we appreciate your hospitality, we've decided to make alternative arrangements for our stay." "Alternative arrangements?" I repeated, allowing just a hint of disappointment to color my tone. "We've booked rooms at the Seabreeze Resort," Patrick explained, clearly bracing for my reaction. "Just for a week to start. The house is clearly not in the condition we expected." I set down my knitting and gave them my best wounded expression. "Is this because of Gertrude? I've relocated her to the garden hose box. Or is it the ghost? I found that leaving out a small glass of whiskey at night really helps keep Christopher's spirit calm." Patrick and Stephanie exchanged glances, clearly trying to determine if I genuinely believed my late husband was haunting the house. "It's not any one thing, Mom," Patrick said carefully. "The house needs work, significant work, before it's suitable for an extended family stay." "I see," I said softly, looking down at my hands. "And when will you be leaving?" "This evening," Stephanie answered, unable to fully hide her relief. "We've already packed most of our things." "So soon? But I haven't even had a chance to show the children how to feed the bat colony in the attic," I lamented. "They're particularly active at this time of year due to the mating season." Molly's eyes widened in horror. "Bats? There are bats?" "Just a small colony," I assured her. "Completely harmless fruit bats. Though they do tend to get tangled in long hair." I glanced meaningfully at Molly's ponytail. "Nothing a good pair of scissors can't fix if one gets stuck." "We'll be leaving in 30 minutes, Stephanie announced firmly, placing protective hands on Molly's shoulders. "Children, finish packing your things. Harold, Evelyn, can you help with the luggage?" As the family scattered to collect their belongings, Patrick lingered, studying me with a mixture of exasperation and dawning suspicion. "Mom, is something going on that I should know about?" he asked. "The house wasn't like this at Christmas, and you've never mentioned a pet crab or bats or ghost whiskey before." I blinked innocently. "Goodness, Patrick, what are you suggesting? That I've deliberately made my home inhospitable to drive away my own family? What kind of mother would do such a thing?" "I didn't say—" "After all," I continued, my voice trembling slightly for effect, "it's not as if you announced your plans to occupy my house for 3 months without asking, or informed me I'd be relegated to the maid's quarters while you and Stephanie took over the master suite that I decorated with such care after your father died. No son would be that inconsiderate to his widowed mother." Patrick had the grace to look uncomfortable. "When you put it that way, it does sound presumptuous, does it?" I asked mildly. I hadn't noticed. We stared at each other for a long moment, a silent battle of wills. For perhaps the first time since he was a teenager, Patrick was the first to look away. "The resort has a 2-bedroom suite available next week," he finally said. "It has an adjoining single room that would be perfect for you, if you'd like to join us there. We'd cover the cost, of course." I considered this unexpected olive branch. "That's very thoughtful, Patrick. I'll consider it." Within the hour, they had loaded their considerable luggage back into the rental SUV. As they prepared to leave, I pressed a small package into Molly's hands. "A little something to remember your visit," I told her. "Open it once you're settled at the resort." Patrick gave me a suspicious look, but Molly seemed genuinely touched by the gesture. As I waved goodbye from my front porch, watching their SUV disappear down the road, I couldn't help but wonder how long it would take them to discover the small, realistic rubber crab I'd hidden in Molly's package, or the recorded clicking sounds that would play when the box was opened. I pulled out my phone to text Amelia. Mission accomplished. House reclaimed in record time. Your mother is a tactical genius. Jorge appeared at his front window and gave me a thumbs up. I returned the gesture with a victory salute. That evening, I moved my belongings back to the master suite, removed the fake Christopher cutout, and restored the room to its peaceful, normal state. The bathroom had abundant hot water, the shower temperature remained perfectly consistent, and no eyes watched me from the picture frames. As I drifted off to sleep in my rightful bed, with the sound of genuine waves replacing Jorge's seagull soundtrack, I could almost hear Christopher's gentle laughter and his voice saying, "That's my Meredith. You finally stood your ground." The morning after my family's hasty retreat brought a peace so profound it felt almost physical. I stretched luxuriously in my reclaimed master bedroom, watching the sunrise paint the ocean in shades of gold and coral. No saxophone solos, no sprinklers striking windows, no sounds of complaint from entitled family members, just the gentle rhythm of waves and distant seagulls, the real ones this time. After a leisurely breakfast on my porch, I began the task of returning the house to normal. The speakers came down, the hidden devices were collected, Gertrude and her crustacean friends were packed for return to the Marine Center, and Jorge helped me restore the sprinkler system to its proper garden watering function. I almost feel bad for them, Jorge chuckled as we reprogrammed the sprinklers. Almost, but not quite. They'll be much happier at the sea breeze, I assured him. Room service, daily housekeeping, no ghost whistles or temperature-shifting showers. "And you'll have your sanctuary back," he observed, studying my relaxed posture. "You look 10 years younger today, Meredith." "I feel it," I admitted. For the first time since Christopher died, I stood up for myself. He would have been proud. As if summoned by the mention of family, my phone rang. Amelia calling from Seattle. "Did it work? Are they gone?" she demanded without preamble. "Operation Empty Nest was a complete success," I confirmed, putting her on speaker so Jorge could hear. "They fled to the Seabreeze Resort yesterday evening. You should have seen their faces when the Seagull Squadron descended." Amelia's laughter bubbled through the phone. "I wish I could have been there. Did you use all the tricks we discussed?" "Most of them," I replied. "The cardboard cutout of your stepfather was particularly effective, especially when paired with the motion-activated whistle. And how's Patrick taking it? Has he figured out what you did?" I considered this. "He's suspicious, but hasn't directly accused me of anything. He did invite me to join them at the resort next week, when a connecting room becomes available." "Are you going to go?" Amelia sounded surprised. "I'm considering it," I admitted. "On my terms this time. A visit, not an occupation. I'll maintain my own space and independence." "Look at you setting boundaries." Amelia's pride was evident. Christopher would be doing a victory dance. After finishing my call with Amelia and thanking Jorge for his invaluable help, I spent the afternoon restoring my home to its former tranquility. By evening, no trace remained of Operation Empty Nest defense beyond a few extra Christopher photos I decided to keep displayed. They made me smile now, reminders of both my late husband and my reclaimed self-respect. Just as I was settling in with a book and a glass of wine, my doorbell rang. To my surprise, Patrick stood on my porch, alone and looking uncharacteristically humble. "May I come in?" he asked. I stepped back, genuinely curious about this unexpected visit. "Of course. Is everything all right at the resort?" "It's fine," he assured me, entering cautiously as if expecting a crab to scuttle across his path. "Comfortable. Convenient. Expensive?" I suggested mildly. He winced. "Very. But that's not why I'm here." I led him to the living room, noting how his eyes darted suspiciously to corners and ceilings, searching for hidden threats or surveillance. "The house looks different," he observed. "Does it? Less haunted." I smiled innocently. "I've never found it haunted, just full of memories." Patrick settled uncomfortably on the sofa, the same one where he'd sat yesterday planning his escape. "Mom, I owe you an apology. This was unexpected." In 42 years, I could count on one hand the times Patrick had voluntarily apologized for anything. "I'm listening," I encouraged when he didn't immediately continue. He ran a hand through his hair, so like Christopher when he was uncomfortable. "It was presumptuous of me to assume we could take over your house for the summer, and relegating you to the back room was inconsiderate." "Yes, it was," I agreed, not making this easier for him. "It's just that—" He hesitated. "That's how it always was when Dad was alive. He would make space for whatever I needed, and you would go along with it. I guess I expected the same accommodation would continue. The insight surprised me, not just that he recognized the pattern, but that he'd articulated it so clearly. Your father loved you very much, I said carefully. Sometimes that love took the form of indulgence. And yes, I enabled it because I wanted peace in the family. But things are different now, Patrick acknowledged. They are, I confirmed. I'm different. Losing your father changed me, Patrick. I'm not just an extension of him or merely your mother. I'm a person in my own right, with my own needs and boundaries. He nodded slowly. I'm beginning to see that, especially after the unusual experiences of the past 24 hours. A smile tugged at the corner of my mouth. The house does have its quirks. Remarkably specific and targeted quirks, Patrick observed dryly, almost as if they were designed to make us uncomfortable. What an imagination you have, I demurred. Next, you'll be suggesting I trained seagulls to attack on command or program the sprinklers to target only the guest room windows. The thought had crossed my mind, he admitted, especially after Molly opened your gift and nearly gave the resort bellhop a heart attack with her screams. I fought to keep my expression neutral. Oh dear. Did she not like the souvenir shell necklace? The rubber crab hidden inside it was an unexpected addition. How careless of the gift shop to include such a thing, I said with wide-eyed innocence. Patrick studied me for a long moment, then surprised me with a genuine laugh, a sound I hadn't heard from him in years. You know what? Dad would have absolutely loved this. He always said you had a hidden streak of mischief that not enough people appreciated. Your father knew me well, I acknowledged, finally allowing my own smile to emerge. So, Patrick leaned forward, hypothetically speaking, if someone were to inconsiderately commandeer their mother's beach house and relegate her to inadequate quarters, what might that mother hypothetically do to reclaim her space? Hypothetically? I pretended to consider. Such a mother might find ways to make her home seem less appealing to unwanted long-term guests. She might exaggerate certain inconveniences or perhaps create new ones. All hypothetically, of course. Of course, Patrick agreed, his eyes crinkling at the corners just like Christopher's used to. And would these hypothetical measures include trained crustaceans, malfunctioning plumbing, and the ghost of her late husband? A creative mother might employ whatever resources she had available, I replied primly. Patrick shook his head in wonderment. You know, Stephanie is convinced you've had some kind of psychological break. Her parents are suggesting elder care evaluations. How thoughtful of them, I remarked. And what do you think? I think, he said slowly, that I underestimated you, that perhaps I've been underestimating you for years. The admission hung between us, not quite an apology, but something equally valuable, recognition. Your father never underestimated me, I told him softly. Even when he overindulged you, he always saw me clearly. It was one of the many reasons I loved him. Patrick nodded, a new understanding in his eyes. He'd be proud of you for standing your ground, even if your methods were unorthodox. Speaking of unorthodox methods, I segued, how are the accommodations at the Seabreeze? Comfortable but cramped, he admitted. We got the last suite available, and it's significantly smaller than we need for 7 people. And significantly more expensive than imposing on your mother, I added. Significantly, he agreed with a grimace. We're looking at some rental houses further up the coast, but peak season options are limited. I considered this information, weighing my options. The victory of reclaiming my space had been sweet, but perhaps there was room for a more nuanced resolution. I've been thinking about your invitation to join you at the resort next week, I said carefully. I have a counter-proposal. Patrick raised an eyebrow, looking intrigued but wary. I'm listening. You and your family are welcome to return here, I began, raising a hand to forestall his immediate response. Under certain conditions. First, I maintain the master bedroom. Second, visits are limited to 2 weeks, not the entire summer. Third, Stephanie's parents find alternative accommodations. The bed and breakfast in town is quite charming. That's actually reasonable, Patrick admitted, looking surprised. I'm a reasonable person when treated with respect, I pointed out. Something your father always understood. Patrick had the grace to look abashed. And the unusual house features? The temperamental plumbing? The electrical issues? The wildlife? Mysteriously resolved, I assured him with a serene smile. Though Gertrude may visit occasionally, she's developed a fondness for the bathtub drain. A look of genuine alarm crossed his face. Gertrude is real? Of course she's real, I replied, enjoying his discomfort. Though considerably smaller than the one you met, about the size of a $50 rather than a dinner plate. Relief washed over his features, followed by another laugh, more genuine this time, less guarded. You really are something, Mom. Dad always said you were the backbone of the family, but I never fully appreciated what he meant until now. As Patrick left with my counteroffer to discuss with his family, I felt a sense of equilibrium I hadn't experienced since Christopher's death. Not just the satisfaction of a successful defense, but something deeper, the realization that I had finally stepped fully into my own identity beyond wife and mother. That night, as I sat on my porch swing watching the moonlight dance across the waves, I could almost feel Christopher beside me, his shoulder pressed against mine, as it had been countless evenings before. You were right, I told the empty space next to me. I did have it in me to stand my ground. It just took losing you to find that strength. A warm breeze swept across the porch, carrying the salt scent of the ocean, and perhaps just the faintest echo of Christopher's laughter. 3 days after Patrick's unexpected visit, my phone rang with a call from the Sea Breeze Resort. I answered with deliberate casualness, though I'd been anticipating this contact since proposing my counteroffer. Hello? Mom, it's Patrick. We've discussed your proposal. Oh? I kept my tone neutral, resisting the urge to point out that they were now negotiating for access to a house they had previously attempted to commandeer. We'd like to accept, with a couple of modifications, he continued, his business negotiation voice in full effect. We'd prefer 3 weeks instead of 2, and we'd like to split the time, 10 days now, then a break while we visit Stephanie's cousin in Virginia, then another 10 days in August. I considered this amendment. It was actually quite reasonable, better than my original offer in fact, as it would give me peaceful intervals between family occupations. That seems workable, I conceded, provided the other conditions remain in place. I maintain the master bedroom, and Stephanie's parents find alternative accommodations. About that, Patrick hesitated. Harold and Evelyn have already booked the bed and breakfast in town for their stay, but Evelyn is concerned about being separated from the grandchildren. She's suggested family dinners every evening. I suppressed a smile at how quickly Stephanie's formidable mother had adjusted her expectations from complete occupation to merely imposing regular dinner visits. Progress. Family dinners would be fine, I agreed, provided they're a collaborative effort, not an additional hosting burden for me. Of course, Patrick assured me quickly. Stephanie and her mother are already planning menus they can prepare. Apparently the kitchenette in their resort suite is rather limiting. How thoughtful, I remarked, careful to keep any hint of sarcasm from my voice. When would you like to return? Tomorrow, if that works for you. The resort is, well, the expense is considerable. Tomorrow is fine, I told him. I'll prepare the rooms, the real rooms, I added pointedly. Not the haunted versions. There was a pause, then Patrick asked the question he'd clearly been holding back. Mom, was anything in that house actually real? The plumbing issues, the electrical problems, the wildlife? Define real, I countered. You know what I mean, he pressed. Were there actually fire ants in the walls or bats in the attic? Patrick, I replied primly. A woman must maintain some mysteries. Let's just say the house will be considerably more comfortable during your next stay. After finalizing the details of their return, I spent the day preparing the guest rooms properly. The children's room was thoroughly decrabbed, with fresh linens and a small basket of genuine beach treasures for Molly and Drake. The third bedroom was similarly refreshed, with a discreet note on the dresser reminding inhabitants that Jorge practiced saxophone only on Tuesday and Thursday evenings at a reasonable volume, and for no more than 30 minutes. I left my own touches in place, of course, my decor, my preferences, my subtle reminders that this was my home where they were welcome guests, not entitled occupants. But there were no cardboard cutouts, no pictures staring from the ceiling, no manipulated appliances or carefully placed rubber wildlife. Well, perhaps one small rubber crab hidden in Drake's bedside drawer. I wasn't made of stone, after all. The following afternoon, the rental SUV once again appeared in my driveway. This time, however, the family that emerged was markedly different from the entitled vacationers who had arrived just days earlier. Patrick approached the front door with a polite knock rather than barging in. Stephanie carried a large potted plant as a hostess gift. The children were subdued, eyeing the house with lingering suspicion. Welcome back, I greeted them, opening the door wide. I hope you found the sea breeze comfortable, if expensive. It was very nice, Stephanie offered with careful politeness. But we're looking forward to more space here. Thank you for having us, Meredith. The formality between us was almost comical, like diplomatic relations being cautiously re-established after an international incident. I've prepared the blue and yellow guest rooms, I informed them. Drake and Molly in the blue room, you and Patrick in the yellow. I assume Harold and Evelyn are settled at the bed and breakfast? They check in this afternoon, Stephanie confirmed. They'll join us for dinner at 6, if that's convenient. I've brought groceries to prepare the meal. That would be lovely, I agreed. I'll help, of course. As they carried their luggage to the guest rooms, I observed their cautious movements, the way they surveyed each space before fully entering, checking corners and drains for unexpected wildlife. Molly refused to use the bathroom until Patrick had conducted a thorough inspection and confirmed it was crab-free. The house seems different, Stephanie commented as she unpacked in the yellow room, casting suspicious glances at the air vents and light fixtures. Does it? I asked innocently. Perhaps it was just settling during your last visit. Old beach houses can be temperamental. Patrick shot me a knowing look, but said nothing, clearly deciding that pursuing the topic would not be in his best interest. By dinner time, a tentative new normal had been established. Stephanie and Evelyn prepared a genuinely impressive meal in my kitchen, with Harold mixing cocktails and the children setting the table without being prompted. A minor miracle I attributed to extensive coaching before their return. As we gathered around the dining table, I could feel the shift in family dynamics. No longer was I the taken-for-granted maternal presence expected to serve and accommodate without acknowledgement. Instead, I was now, perhaps for the first time in my relationship with Patrick's family, recognized as a person with authority and boundaries worthy of respect. A toast, Harold proposed, raising his glass, to Meredith for her gracious hospitality and adaptable household. A ripple of nervous laughter circled the table as glasses clinked. Even Stephanie managed a genuine smile, though her eyes still darted occasionally to the ceiling as if expecting a rain of Christopher photos or mechanical seagulls. And to family visits, I added, raising my own glass, of appropriate duration and with mutual consideration. Patrick nearly choked on his wine, but recovered admirably. To mutual consideration, he echoed, the message clearly received. The dinner conversation flowed more easily than I had anticipated, with Drake reluctantly sharing details about a marine biology program at the resort that had captured his interest, and Molly describing the shells she'd collected along the beach. The undercurrent of tension gradually eased as it became clear that the house was behaving normally. No fluctuating electricity, no mysterious sounds from the attic, no crustaceans emerging from drains. After dessert, as we moved to the porch to enjoy the sunset, Evelyn approached me with uncharacteristic hesitancy. Meredith, she began, her country club composure slightly strained. I feel I owe you an apology. It was presumptuous of us to assume we could simply join the children for the entire summer without proper invitation. The admission clearly cost her considerable pride. Evelyn had always positioned herself as the family matriarch, the authority on proper behavior and social expectations. For her to acknowledge overstepping was unprecedented. We all have our blind spots where family is concerned, I offered generously. I've certainly had mine over the years. Yes, well, she sniffed, reverting somewhat to her usual demeanor. The bed and breakfast is quite charming, though the pillows leave something to be desired. Harold and I will be quite comfortable there for our visit, not the summer. Progress, indeed. As the evening wound down and my reconfigured family gathering dispersed, Harold and Evelyn to their bed and breakfast, the children to explore the beach before darkness fell completely, Stephanie to unpack the remaining luggage, Patrick lingered on the porch with me, watching the first stars appear over the ocean. You know, he said after a comfortable silence, Dad would have handled this situation differently. How so? I asked, curious about his perspective. He would have immediately given up the master bedroom, moved to the back room without complaint, and spent the summer mediating between you and Stephanie while pretending everything was fine. I nodded, recognizing the truth in this assessment. Your father was a peacekeeper, sometimes at his own expense. But you found another way, Patrick observed. Less accommodating, more creative. I prefer to think of it as instructional rather than simply creative, I corrected him. Some lessons require vivid illustrations to be properly absorbed. A genuine laugh escaped him, the second I'd heard in our recent interactions, a sound reminiscent of the boy he'd been before adult ambition and entitlement had reshaped him. "Message received, Mom," he assured me, loud and clear. "No more assumptions about your house, your space, or your willingness to be inconvenienced." As Patrick joined his family on the beach, I remained on the porch, savoring the unexpected satisfaction of this new equilibrium. The next 3 weeks, split into 2 manageable visits, would undoubtedly bring challenges, but the fundamental dynamic had shifted. In standing my ground through unorthodox methods, I had not only reclaimed my physical space, but also established a new place for myself in our family structure. Christopher had always told me I had hidden depths. How delighted he would be to discover he was right, even in his absence. The first week of my family's renegotiated stay unfolded with surprising smoothness. Patrick and Stephanie maintained a deliberate politeness that, while slightly formal, represented a vast improvement over their previous entitled approach. The children gradually relaxed as no further crustacean encounters materialized, though Drake continued to check under his bed each night, a precaution that amused me secretly. Harold and Evelyn arrived punctually each evening for dinner, bringing wine or dessert and departing by 9, respecting boundaries that would have been unimaginable in their original summer occupation plan. Even Stephanie's tendency to reorganize my kitchen items had been curtailed, replaced by careful requests whenever she needed something. "It's almost disconcerting," I confided to Jorge during our morning coffee on my porch, 6 days into their stay. "Everyone's being so considerate. The power of strategic haunting," he chuckled. "Nothing builds respect like a few well-placed ghost whispers and temperamental appliances." "I keep waiting for them to revert to form," I admitted, "for Patrick to make demands or Stephanie to critique my decor." "Give them time," Jorge advised sagely. "Old habits die hard, but new ones can form with proper motivation. And you provided extremely effective motivation." That afternoon, as I returned from my Tai Chi class on the beach, I found Patrick alone in the house, working on his laptop at the dining table. "Where is everyone?" I asked, setting down my yoga mat. "Stephanie took the kids to some seashell art class at the resort," he replied, closing his computer. "She thought it might be good for them to have a creative outlet that doesn't involve screens." I raised an eyebrow at this uncharacteristic parenting choice. Stephanie typically preferred activities that photographed well for social media rather than those with genuine educational value. "That sounds wonderful," I commented. "And unlike her," Patrick smiled ruefully. "She's been doing some thinking since our abrupt departure and return. We both have." "Oh?" I kept my tone neutral, though I was genuinely curious. "Mom, can we talk?" Patrick gestured to the chair across from him. "Really talk, without the diplomatic dancing we've been doing all week?" I settled into the indicated seat, intrigued by this unexpected opening. "I'm listening." Patrick ran a hand through his hair, so like his father when gathering difficult thoughts. When Dad was alive, he managed all the relationship logistics in our family. He was the buffer, the translator, the mediator. "He was," I agreed. "Your father had a gift for smoothing rough edges. After he died," Patrick continued, "I think we all fell into our established patterns without him there to adjust the balance. I expected the same accommodation from you that Dad always facilitated." Stephanie assumed the hierarchy with her parents would continue unchallenged. The self-awareness in his assessment surprised me. "That's quite insightful, Patrick. I've had some time to reflect," he admitted, "particularly after being driven from your house by what I now strongly suspect was an elaborate psychological operation worthy of military intelligence." I maintained an expression of polite interest, neither confirming nor denying. "The thing is," he continued, "I never really saw you apart from Dad. You were always a unit in my mind, with him as the voice and you as the support system." The description stung slightly with its accuracy. I had indeed allowed Christopher to be our primary family representative, comfortable in the supporting role that came naturally to me. "That wasn't your father's doing," I clarified. "It was a dynamic we both participated in. Christopher was naturally outgoing, and I preferred operating behind the scenes. But that doesn't mean I didn't have my own thoughts and boundaries." "I see that now," Patrick acknowledged. "Quite clearly, in fact. A moment of understanding passed between us, mother and son seeing each other more fully perhaps than we had in decades. Stephanie and I have been talking, he continued, about how we've approached family relationships, about the examples we're setting for Drake and Molly. We don't want them growing up with the same entitlement issues. The admission was so unexpected, I momentarily struggled for a response. That's commendable, I finally managed. It's necessary, Patrick corrected. Watching how Stephanie's parents interact with the world, the constant expectations of special treatment, the inability to consider others' needs, I'm starting to recognize those same patterns in us, and in the kids, particularly Molly. I thought of my granddaughter's typical behavior, the whining demands, the expectation of immediate gratification, the difficulty sharing attention or resources. Molly does have rather firm expectations, I acknowledged diplomatically. She's a spoiled brat, Patrick stated bluntly, and that's on us. We've given her everything without requiring appreciation or consideration. Drake's heading down the same path, just more quietly with his face buried in a screen. This level of parental self-awareness was unprecedented from my son and daughter-in-law, who typically defended their children's behavior as spirited or strong-willed, rather than acknowledging any problematic patterns. What brought on this revelation? I asked, genuinely curious. Patrick's lips twitched with reluctant amusement. Honestly? Watching Molly's complete meltdown at the resort when she discovered the rubber crab in your gift? It wasn't just normal 10-year-old dramatics. It was a full-scale emotional collapse over a minor surprise. Stephanie and I realized we were looking at our future if we didn't change course. I felt a twinge of guilt about using my granddaughter as an object lesson, quickly followed by the satisfaction of knowing my tactical crab deployment had catalyzed some genuine family reflection. Parenting is a continuous recalibration, I offered. Your father and I certainly made our share of mistakes. Like indulging my every whim? Patrick suggested wryly. Among others, I acknowledged with a small smile. Though in our defense you were quite persuasive even as a child. You could present a case for a new toy or later bedtime with the precision of a courtroom attorney. A skill I've apparently passed to Molly without the accompanying lessons in restraint and consideration. He sighed. Which brings me to a favor I'd like to ask. Oh? Would you be willing to spend some one-on-one time with the kids during this visit? Not as the indulgent grandmother, but as the woman who just orchestrated an elaborate tactical haunting to teach her adult son about boundaries. I think they could benefit from your perspective. The request caught me completely off guard. Patrick and Stephanie had always carefully managed my interactions with their children, preferring brief, heavily supervised visits that maintained their parental authority. This invitation to influence their development represented a seismic shift in our family dynamic. I'd be happy to, I said carefully. What did you have in mind? Drake mentioned the marine biology program at the resort, Patrick suggested. I know you volunteer at the conservation center. Maybe you could take him there? Show him what you do? And Molly loves art. Perhaps she'd enjoy your watercolor class. Those sound like excellent starting points, I agreed, trying not to show how touched I was by his thoughtfulness in connecting my interests with the children's. Just one condition, Patrick added, a hint of his old wryness returning. No more surprise crustaceans, mechanical or otherwise. I don't think Molly's nervous system can handle another shock. I'll restrict myself to conventional grandmother activities, I promised solemnly, though I make no guarantees about what the Marine Center volunteers might show them. Jorge's grandson works in the touch tank area and has a particular fondness for sea cucumbers that excrete defensively when handled. Patrick's laugh, genuine and unguarded, echoed his father's so clearly it momentarily tightened my throat with memory and loss. But the ache was softer now, tempered by the growing connection with the son sitting across from me. A connection built not on accommodation or obligation, but on newfound mutual respect. That evening, as we all gathered for dinner on the porch, I observed my reconfigured family with fresh eyes. Harold still dominated conversations, and Evelyn maintained her country club polish. But their interactions with the children seemed more genuinely engaged, rather than performatively grandparental. Stephanie hovered less over Molly's table manners, allowing natural consequences when she spilled her drink, rather than swooping in with immediate damage control. Small shifts, but meaningful ones. Perhaps Operation Empty Nest Defense had yielded unexpected dividends beyond merely reclaiming my physical space. As the ocean breeze carried the scent of salt and distant rain, I lifted my glass in a silent toast to Christopher, whose absence had ultimately forced us all to rebuild our family relationships on more authentic foundations. Sometimes, the most meaningful renovations begin with necessary demolition. The Marine Conservation Center hummed with activity as I guided Drake through the back areas not typically open to visitors. As a longtime volunteer, I had access to the rehabilitation tanks and research facilities that fascinated my 13-year-old grandson far more than the public touch pools and educational displays. "This is Walter," I explained, stopping at a tank where a large sea turtle swam with the aid of a custom-made prosthetic flipper. He was caught in a boat propeller 3 months ago. The team here designed and 3D printed this attachment to help him balance until he adapts to swimming with 3 natural flippers. Drake, who had been largely silent during our drive to the center, moved closer to the tank, genuine interest displacing his usual bored expression. "How does it stay on?" he asked, studying the attachment. "That's the clever part," I replied, signaling to Maya, the center's rehabilitation specialist, who approached with a tablet displaying the design schematics. "It's a biomechanical interface that uses natural muscle movement to secure the prosthesis without restricting blood flow or causing abrasion," Maya completed, handing the tablet to Drake. The design took 6 iterations to perfect. To my surprise, Drake engaged immediately with the technical details, asking thoughtful questions about materials, buoyancy adjustments, and growth accommodation. Maya, impressed by his questions, spent nearly 30 minutes explaining the center's work with injured marine life and the technology they employed. "We have an internship program for high school students," she mentioned, as we prepared to continue our tour. "Something to consider in a couple of years, if your interest continues." Drake nodded. His usual non-committal teenager shrug noticeably absent. "That would be cool. Way better than the business camp Dad keeps talking about." "Business camp?" I inquired as we moved toward the seabird rehabilitation area. "Yeah, some executive leadership program for teenagers at his company. Sounds completely boring." Drake's tone carried the disdain only a 13-year-old can perfect. "Dad wants me to follow his career path, but I'd rather do something that actually matters." The revelation surprised me. Patrick had never mentioned these specific career expectations for Drake, though I'd noticed his tendency to steer conversations toward business and finance whenever Drake expressed interest in science or nature. "Your grandfather was a numbers person too," I said carefully, "but he always appreciated work that made a tangible difference. He would have loved this place." "Really?" Drake glanced at me with unexpected interest. "Dad always talks about Grandpa's financial planning and investment strategies, not sea turtles." "Your grandfather contained multitudes," I smiled. "His accounting skills paid the bills, but his passion was solving practical problems. He built a wheelchair ramp for our elderly neighbor using recycled materials before accessibility was widely discussed. He designed a specialized feeding system for injured birds at a wildlife sanctuary near our first home." "Dad never mentions that stuff," Drake observed. "People often reduce those they love to simplified versions that fit their own narratives," I replied. "Your father admired the financial security your grandfather created for our family. That's the part of Christopher he chose to emulate and remember. But there were many other dimensions to the man I married." As we continued through the facility, I shared more stories of Christopher's practical problem-solving and environmental interests, aspects of his grandfather Drake had never heard about from Patrick. With each anecdote, I watched my grandson's perception of his family legacy expand beyond the narrow financial success narrative he'd been given. By the time we left the center 3 hours later, Drake had signed up for the center's youth volunteer program and was clutching brochures about marine biology career paths. "Don't mention the internship thing to Dad yet, okay?" he requested as we drove home. "He'll just give me the whole speech about impractical career choices and the importance of business fundamentals." "Your secret is safe with me," I assured him, "though you might be surprised by your father's reaction." "People can evolve when given the opportunity." Drake shot me a skeptical look. "Like Dad's suddenly going to be cool with me wanting to design prosthetics for sea turtles instead of becoming a marketing executive?" "Stranger things have happened," I replied enigmatically, thinking of the significant shifts I'd already witnessed in Patrick since our house-haunting adventure. Change often comes from unexpected directions. 2 days later, it was Molly's turn for grandmother time. Unlike Drake's science expedition, our outing was a simple watercolor class on the beach, taught by my friend Maggie, who specialized in capturing the coastal landscape with loose, impressionistic techniques. Molly initially approached the activity with trepidation, her confidence in structured academic settings not translating to the more fluid creative process. "I can't do it right," she fretted after her first attempt at capturing the shoreline resulted in bleeding colors and indistinct shapes. "It doesn't look like a real beach. Watercolor isn't about exact replication," Maggie explained gently. "It's about capturing feeling through color and movement. There's no right way to do it. But I want mine to be the best one," Molly insisted, casting competitive glances at the other students' work. "Art isn't a competition, sweetheart," I told her, recognizing the perfectionist streak she'd inherited from both parents. "It's expression. Your beach can be however you experience it. But how will people know I'm good at it if it doesn't look perfect?" Her genuine confusion revealed volumes about the performance-oriented praise she'd received throughout her young life. "The question isn't whether you're good at art," I suggested, guiding her brush in a more relaxed stroke. "The question is whether making art is good for you. Do you enjoy the process? Does mixing these colors and watching them blend on the paper bring you satisfaction?" She considered this novel concept, pleasure in process rather than validation through results, with the seriousness only a 10-year-old can bring to philosophical questions. "I like the blue when it meets the green," she finally admitted. "It makes this cool, swirly pattern that looks like the water when it pulls back from the sand." "That's exactly what matters," I encouraged. "Focus on those moments that please you, not on how the final product will be judged." By the end of the 2-hour class, Molly had produced 3 small paintings, none technically perfect, but each showing increasing freedom and experimentation. Her final piece, a sunset interpretation with bold oranges bleeding into deep purples, carried genuine emotional impact despite its technical imperfections. "Can we do this again tomorrow?" she asked as we packed up our supplies. "I want to try capturing the waves when they crash. I think I need more white for the foam part." "We certainly can," I agreed, touched by her enthusiasm. "And perhaps we could frame your sunset painting to hang in your room at home? A reminder of your beach vacation. Could we put it somewhere everyone can see it?" she asked hesitantly. "Even if it's not perfect?" "Especially because it's not perfect," I assured her. "The most interesting art shows the artist's journey, not just their destination." As we walked back to the house, Molly's paint-splattered hand in mine, I realized I was forging connections with my grandchildren that had never been possible during our previous, tightly managed family gatherings. Patrick and Stephanie's decision to allow me unfiltered access to Drake and Molly had created space for genuine relationship building, not just performative grandparenting. That evening, as I helped Molly mat her sunset painting for display on the living room wall, I caught Patrick watching us with an expression I couldn't quite interpret, something between surprise and wistfulness. "She hasn't stopped talking about the watercolor class," he commented later as we cleaned up after dinner. "I've never seen her so excited about something that didn't come with a competitive ranking or external validation." "Children respond to authentic engagement," I replied. "Molly has a natural eye for color and movement. Drake has an impressive grasp of mechanical design principles. They're both discovering parts of themselves beyond academic achievement or social performance. Parts we haven't necessarily nurtured," Patrick acknowledged quietly. "Too focused on measurable outcomes and college application building blocks." "You were the same way at their ages," I reminded him. "Always taking apart mechanical things to see how they worked, always asking about natural processes. Your father used to say you had an engineer's mind trapped in a future businessman's career path." Patrick looked startled. "Dad said that? He always seemed so supportive of my business interests." "He supported whatever path you chose," I clarified, "but he also recognized aspects of your curiosity and creativity that your career path didn't fully engage. That's why he involved you in his home improvement projects and restoration work, to nurture those parts of you." As understanding dawned in Patrick's eyes, I recognized another small bridge being built across the gap that Christopher's death had left in our family, not just between me and my grandchildren, but between Patrick and the fuller understanding of his own father's legacy. Sometimes, the most important inheritances aren't financial at all. The next morning dawned clear and bright, perfect for my planned excursion with Drake to the Marine Conservation Center. To my surprise, he was already awake when I entered the kitchen, sitting at the table with a bowl of cereal and, most shocking of all, no electronic device in sight. "Morning, Grandma," he mumbled around a mouthful of breakfast. "Dad said we're going to see weird ocean stuff today." The Marine Conservation Center, I confirmed, pouring myself coffee, where I volunteer 2 days a week. They rehabilitate injured sea creatures and educate visitors about ocean conservation. Drake's typical teenage indifference seemed slightly diminished. Do they have sharks? Several species in the recovery tanks, I told him, including a young nurse shark that was caught in fishing nets last month. You might even be allowed to help with her feeding if Marcus is working today. That caught his full attention. For real? Like, actually feed a shark? Marcus is very good at assessing which visitors can be trusted with such responsibilities, I said carefully. He looks for people who can follow instructions precisely and remain calm around the animals. Drake sat up straighter, a hint of determination replacing his usual slouch. I can do that. The transformation continued as we drove to the center, with Drake asking increasingly specific questions about marine life and conservation efforts. By the time we arrived, he had abandoned all pretense of adolescent disinterest, practically bouncing with anticipation as I signed us in at the volunteer desk. Mrs. Collins, welcome back, Marcus greeted me with a warm smile. And you've brought a helper today? My grandson Drake, I introduced. He's interested in your shark rehabilitation program. Marcus studied Drake with the same assessing look he gave all potential volunteers. Ever worked with marine life before, Drake? No, sir, Drake replied, the sir clearly a coached addition from Patrick, but delivered with surprising sincerity. But I'm a quick learner, and I'll follow all safety protocols. Marcus's eyebrows rose slightly at the formal response. Well then, let's get you both some volunteer badges and start with orientation. What followed was one of the most remarkable transformations I'd witnessed in my grandson. The boy, who typically couldn't focus on anything beyond a screen for more than 5 minutes, spent 3 hours in complete absorption, measuring water quality parameters, preparing specialized feed for different species, and ultimately, under Marcus's careful supervision, helping to feed the juvenile nurse shark. She likes you, Marcus observed as the shark accepted food from the feeding stick Drake cautiously extended into the tank. Mako here is usually suspicious of new people. Drake's face glowed with a pride I'd never seen before. Not the artificial confidence of beating a video game level, but the genuine satisfaction of earning trust from a living creature. How often do you guys feed her? He asked, carefully following Marcus's instructions to withdraw the feeding stick. Twice daily, Marcus replied. We're short-staffed on Thursdays if you're interested in a regular volunteer position. With your grandmother as supervisor, of course, he added with a nod to me. Drake turned to me, eyes wide with an unspoken question. We're only here for another week this visit, I reminded him gently. But we'll be back for 10 days in August. Perhaps we could arrange something then? That would be awesome, Drake breathed, turning back to the shark tank with newfound purpose. On the drive home, Drake was uncharacteristically communicative, describing each aspect of the experience in detail and asking thoughtful questions about marine conservation. When I mentioned that several of the center's programs were funded by donations and volunteer efforts, he fell silent for a moment. I get an allowance, he said finally. It's probably not enough to help much, but maybe I could, I don't know, donate some of it? For Mako's food or something? The suggestion, so at odds with the materialistic focus his parents had always encouraged, caught me by surprise. That's very thoughtful, Drake, I told him sincerely. Even small donations make a difference when people care enough to give. He nodded, looking out the window pensively. Nobody at school cares about this stuff. It's all about having the newest phone or the coolest shoes. But that shark, she almost died because someone left fishing nets in the water. That seems way more important than having the latest whatever. The insight from my 13-year-old grandson, previously obsessed with status symbols and screen time, rendered me momentarily speechless. Your grandfather would have agreed with you completely, I finally said. He believed in finding purpose beyond possessions. Dad says Grandpa Chris was really smart about stuff like that, Drake replied. He said he wishes he'd paid more attention to his advice when he was younger. This glimpse into Patrick's private reflections with his son touched me deeply. Perhaps my son was doing more soul-searching than I'd realized. When we arrived home, Drake immediately sought out Patrick to share his experience, his voice animated in a way I hadn't heard since he was a much younger child. And Grandma knew everyone there, he concluded his breathless recounting. She's like, important. They all asked her advice about the sea turtles and stuff. Patrick caught my eye over Drake's head, a look of surprised appreciation crossing his features. I had no idea you were so involved at the center, Mom. There's quite a bit we don't know about each other, I observed mildly. Perhaps that's changing. The next day brought Molly's turn for grandmother time. Unlike Drake's scientific excursion, our outing was a simple beach watercolor session with my informal painting group, 4 other retirees who gathered weekly to capture the coastal landscapes. I'm not very good at art, Molly confessed as we settled on our beach chairs, small travel watercolor sets balanced on our knees. Ms. Peterson at school said my perspective needs work. Perspective is just a technical skill that comes with practice, I assured her. Today, we're just playing with color and feeling. No judgment, no grades. The concept of creating without evaluation seemed foreign to my performance-oriented granddaughter. Stephanie had always emphasized achievement over enjoyment, enrolling Molly in competitive dance, gymnastics, and music lessons since preschool. But how will we know if it's good? She pressed. We won't concern ourselves with good, I explained. We'll focus on satisfying instead. Does the process feel engaging? Does the result please your eye? That's success in this context. Molly's brow furrowed as she considered this unfamiliar metric. Beside us, my friend Dorothy, a retired art therapist, nodded approvingly at my approach. Art is conversation, not performance, Dorothy added gently. You're having a dialogue with the paper and paint, not presenting for applause. For the first hour, Molly's attempts were stilted and self-conscious, her small body tense with the effort of doing it right. But gradually, as she watched the other painters work without self-criticism, laughing at their own splashes and unexpected color blends, her movements became more fluid, her expression more relaxed. By the time we packed up 3 hours later, Molly had produced 4 small watercolors, none technically impressive, but each progressively more joyful and uninhibited. The final one, a riot of blues and purples representing the waves, carried an emotional energy that transcended its childlike execution. Can we come back tomorrow? She asked as we walked home, carefully carrying her paintings in a folder Dorothy had provided. This was a special session, I explained, but we could certainly set up our own painting time on the porch, just the 2 of us. I'd like that, she said, slipping her small hand into mine, a gesture of physical affection she hadn't offered since toddlerhood. Back at the house, Molly proudly displayed her artwork to the family, including Harold and Evelyn, who had arrived early for dinner. It's very expressive, Stephanie commented, clearly struggling to find appropriate praise for the technically unimpressive paintings. It felt really good to make them, Molly declared with unexpected confidence. Grandma says art is about the feeling, not just how it looks. Stephanie glanced at me, a mixture of surprise and what might have been grudging appreciation in her expression. That's a valuable perspective. As the family gathered for dinner, I observed the subtle but significant shifts in our interactions. Drake enthusiastically described the Marine Center to Molly, promising to take her to see Mako on their August visit. Patrick engaged Harold in a conversation about conservation funding that managed to navigate their political differences without the usual tension. Even Stephanie and Evelyn seemed less focused on appearances, allowing Molly to serve dessert despite her slightly messy technique. Small changes, but meaningful ones, like the first brush strokes on a blank canvas or the initial water quality adjustments for an injured shark, these were the essential foundations for something potentially transformative. That night, as I prepared for bed, I found a small handmade card slipped under my door, a watercolor wash of ocean blues with careful lettering that read, "Thank you for teaching me about art feelings. Love, Molly." I placed it on my nightstand, beside Christopher's photo, a tangible symbol of new connections forming in the wake of necessary disruptions. The last days of my family's initial visit passed in a blur of beach excursions, shared meals, and the gradual easing of long-established tensions. Drake made 2 more visits to the Marine Center, returning each time with increasingly specific knowledge about shark rehabilitation. Molly and I established a daily watercolor ritual on the porch, her brushwork growing more confident with each small painting. Even Stephanie had unbent enough to join us for one session, producing a technically precise but emotionally restrained seascape that prompted a thoughtful conversation about perfectionism. On their final morning, as Patrick loaded the SUV for their drive to Virginia, I observed my family with a sense of quiet amazement. The entitled vacationers who had arrived expecting to commandeer my house for the summer bore little resemblance to the people now preparing to depart. Drake carefully packed his marine biology books and the journal Marcus had given him to record observations. Molly organized her watercolor kit with newfound respect for the materials. Even Stephanie moved through the house with consideration, restoring each room to its original state rather than leaving a wake of disorder for me to address. "We'll see you in 3 weeks," Patrick reminded me as he closed the trunk. "August 12th, as agreed. I'll have your rooms ready," I promised. "The real rooms, not the haunted versions." His lips twitched with suppressed amusement. "I appreciate that, though I'm keeping the rubber crab Molly found as insurance." "A wise precaution," I acknowledged solemnly. As the family gathered for final goodbyes, Harold and Evelyn joining us from the bed and breakfast where they'd spent their stay, I was surprised by the genuine warmth of their embraces. Drake's gangly teenage hug lingered longer than usual. Molly pressed a final watercolor into my hands, a family portrait of sorts, with colorful blobs representing each of us standing before a blue ocean backdrop. "It's all of us at your house," she explained earnestly. "See, that's you in the purple shirt, and that's me holding my paintbrush, and there's Drake talking about sharks. It's beautiful," I told her, meaning it despite the childlike execution. "I'll frame it for the living room." Most surprising was Stephanie's farewell, a careful hug followed by an unexpected admission. "This visit turned out very differently than I expected, Meredith. In a good way. Thank you for everything." The deliberate vagueness acknowledged our unspoken understanding about Operation Empty Nest Defense without directly referencing it, a diplomatic choice that showed more self-awareness than I'd previously credited her with possessing. As the SUV pulled away, Jorge emerged from his house to join me on the porch, watching the departing vehicle with undisguised curiosity. "So, the invaders have retreated," he observed. "Temporarily, at least. How was the occupation?" "Surprisingly successful," I admitted. "The negotiations yielded better terms than I expected." "No further need for tactical saxophone deployments, then?" I laughed. "I think conventional diplomacy will suffice for the August visit, though I'm keeping your number on speed dial, just in case." The 3 weeks between visits passed in a pleasant rhythm of my own making. Volunteer shifts at the Marine Center, watercolor sessions with my beach group, quiet dinners with Jorge and other friends from town. I even attended a jazz concert with David, the literature professor I'd been cautiously getting to know before my family's arrival. The freedom to structure my days without accommodation or explanation felt like a luxury, one I'd earned through boundaries rather than capitulation. I did make certain preparations for my family's return, though none involving cardboard cutouts or temperature-shifting showers. Instead, I stocked art supplies for Molly, arranged additional volunteer opportunities for Drake at the Marine Center, and researched local activities that might appeal to everyone's emerging interests, rather than just Stephanie and Evelyn's shopping preferences. When August 12th arrived, the SUV that pulled into my driveway contained a family subtly transformed by the weeks since our last interaction. Drake's gaming device remained tucked away as he eagerly pointed out coastal features to his sister. Molly clutched a sketchbook filled with practice drawings from her Virginia visit. Even Patrick and Stephanie seemed more relaxed, less concerned with appearances and status than I'd ever observed. "Welcome back," I greeted them, holding the door open. "How was Virginia?" "Educational," Patrick replied with meaningful emphasis. "Stephanie's cousin Roger has 4 children who are not permitted screens of any kind during family gatherings. It was an adjustment for our 2. Dad made us play board games every night," Drake reported, his tone suggesting this primitive entertainment had proven surprisingly acceptable. "And we had to talk to actual people at meals. The horror," I commented dryly. "It was weird at first," he admitted. "But Roger's kids know all these card games, and his daughter Emily is really into marine biology too. She's volunteered at the Virginia Aquarium since she was 14. Interesting, I thought. A peer with similar interests but different values had made more impact in reinforcing Drake's new passion than any number of parental lectures could have achieved. Stephanie joined us in the entryway, looking somewhat more casual than her usual carefully curated self. "Meredith, the house looks lovely. Thank you for hosting us again." The genuine warmth in her voice suggested the Virginia visit had indeed been educational for the adults as well as the children. Patrick had mentioned that Roger was a successful corporate attorney like Stephanie's father, but with decidedly different priorities regarding work-life balance and conspicuous consumption. Perhaps seeing an alternative model of success had prompted some reconsideration. As they settled into their rooms, the same ones they'd occupied during their previous stay, minus any hauntings or wildlife. I observed the subtle but significant differences in their behavior. They moved through my house with respect rather than entitlement, recognized boundaries without requiring enforcement, and genuinely engaged with the environment rather than merely occupying space. That evening, as we gathered on the porch for dinner, Molly presented me with a gift, a framed collage of watercolor postcards she had created during their Virginia stay. "I practiced every day," she told me proudly. "Aunt Karen, that's Mom's cousin's wife, she used to teach art, and she showed me some techniques. See how the waves have more movement in this one? Your progress is remarkable," I told her sincerely, noting the genuine improvement in her brushwork. "You've developed your own style." Patrick caught my eye over his daughter's head, his expression conveying silent gratitude for the creative spark our painting sessions had ignited. The connection between us felt different now, not the careful deference of a child to parent or the entitled expectations of an adult son, but something closer to true adult kinship, rooted in mutual respect. After dinner, as the children explored the beach for night creatures with special flashlights Drake had requested specifically for this purpose, Patrick and Stephanie lingered on the porch with me, watching the moon rise over the ocean. "We've been thinking," Patrick began, his tone suggesting careful consideration rather than impulsive decision-making, "about holidays this year. Traditionally, we've hosted at our house, with your obligatory day-before visit that never quite allowed you to be part of the actual celebration." I nodded, recognizing his accurate assessment of our typical holiday pattern. The perfunctory pre-Christmas dinner, where I delivered gifts and received formal thanks before being dispatched back to my solitude, while the real family celebration occurred the following day. "We were wondering," Stephanie continued, surprising me by taking the lead, "if you might consider hosting Thanksgiving here at the beach house, all of us, including Amelia and her family if they can make it from Seattle." The invitation, or request, depending on perspective, hung in the night air. 6 months ago, it would have represented another assumption of my availability and resources. Now, shaped by our summer experiences, it felt like a genuine attempt at inclusion. "I'd like that very much," I replied simply. As Patrick and Stephanie outlined their preliminary thoughts for the holiday gathering, I gazed out at the ocean where my grandchildren's flashlight beams bounced along the shoreline. The journey from that first confrontational phone call to this peaceful evening had been unexpected in its twists and challenges. Yet here we were, reconfigured but intact, a family finding its way toward more authentic connection. Christopher would have been amused by my methods, but approving of the results. He had always maintained that families, like the ocean, required both calm and storm to remain healthy. Periods of peaceful coexistence, punctuated by necessary disruptions that cleared away accumulated debris and created space for new growth. As I watched the moonlight silvering the waves, I silently thanked him for the legacy of resilience he had left us, and for the unexpected gift his absence had ultimately provided, the opportunity for all of us to rediscover each other and ourselves in the spaces between loss and renewal. Thank you very much for listening. Please leave a comment with a rating from 0 to 10, subscribe to the channel, and share this story with a friend.